I just finished Ulysses by James Joyce for the second time. Let me tell you what I think about it. Hi, I'm Jim. This is Great Books, Big Ideas. And I'm here to talk to you today about Ulysses by James Joyce. This is my second time reading this book. Let me tell you a little bit about why I came back to it this year and what, sort of initiated or prompted the reread. And I'll give you some impressions about the novel. I first read this back in my early 20s. I think I started it when I was in college. It was not an assigned book. I had this volume, this Random House Modern Library edition, that was my father's, and it was on the bookshelves in my bedroom. And as I started to take interest in James Joyce, I think I might have read some stories from Dubliners in college, and then I read Dubliners, read Portrait of the Artist, I remember, and really liked it. So I thought, let's check out Ulysses. It's on my shelf. So this is a very well-worn copy, and this was the first version of Ulysses that I read, Random House Modern Library. And it has my father's signature in there and his address. He was living in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. I don't know the date, but someone must have given this to him for Christmas. And I wonder whose writing that is. It's hard to tell. Like, it might have been a friend of his, or who knows. Anyway, I read it through. I didn't really understand it a whole lot the first time through, but you have to be impressed at some level by any reading of James Joyce. Really an amazing author. But I did the best I could at the time. I was big into modernist writing as a young reader, even though I didn't fully understand those works. That was kind of the thing to read. It was in vogue. So I took a stab at Ulysses. I made it all the way through, but I can't say I really took a whole lot away from it. When I then, at the end of college, I did take a trip with a high school buddy, and we went to England, Ireland, and France for about 3 weeks. And we spent about 3 days in Ireland, spent a day or two in Dublin, and the book kind of came to life then because I could see the place that he was writing about, and those memories have lived with me ever since. But anyway, what drove me to reread the book was I got this edition, the Gabler edition of Ulysses. A few months ago, I think over the winter, I was at the Second Reading Bookshop in downtown Westchester and nabbed this off the shelf. I only paid a few bucks for it. I thought it was a great bargain. Was an unused edition, not marked up at all. And I thought, okay, let's see what this edition has to offer. So the history of James Joyce Ulysses editions is rather complex, and I'm not an expert at it. This reading text of a big sort of synoptic editorial project that Gabler headed was controversial, and this came out in the mid '80s, I think. And there were some people who criticized the editorial choices that he made. He made thousands of corrections to the text, the original edition, and not everyone agreed with those changes, I guess. To make a long story short, you can read more about it online if you're curious. But I wanted to tackle this, see what it was all about, and yeah, that's it. So other editions, well, first of all, this is the earliest edition I owned. This came out in the 30s, I think. 34 originally was the Modern Library version. And the novel was published, what was it, in 1922 or 1924 when it first came out. And this actually was probably a 1942 reprint was when this one came out. And then that's the one I first read. And then a few years ago, I found this used copy, and this turns out to be also a Random House edition, but it's a renewed copyright in 1961, and I think this is purports to be a corrected text. Yeah, new edition, corrected and reset in 1961. And I've since discovered I was going to get rid of this because I have two copies of Ulysses now, this one and this one. And I thought, well, this one's like maybe I don't need this one. But I was just reading today, doing some background research, and some publishers seem to be gravitating back toward this 1961 reset and corrected edition. So I guess I'm going to keep this one. So probably the next time I read Ulysses, I hope there's a next time, I'll give this one a shot and see how it goes. It's a complicated story, and I'll leave it for the experts to enlighten you about that. But this is the one I read. So that was the impetus for rereading it this year. Was I found this in the bookshop. I like to read the books that I buy eventually, and I thought, well, let me find a time to give it a go. And then I started seeing rumblings on BookTube about people who are doing read-alongs, and for June, like June is like the perfect month to read Ulysses because it's set on June 16th in 1904, one day in the life of all these Dubliners. And those videos I watched inspired me to do it myself, and I thought, I'm going to set a goal. I'm going to start reading this at the end of May, early June, and I'm going to try to finish it by Bloomsday of June 16th, 1904. So I tried to read one episode every day. That if you divide this into chapters, as Gabler does, it's like 18 chapters or episodes that align with scenes from Homer's Odyssey. So you've got chapters on Telemachus, Nestor, Proteus, Calypso, Lotus Eaters, Hades, Aeolus, Lastrygonians, Scylla and Charybdis, Wandering Rocks, Sirens, Cyclops, Nausicaa, Oxen of the Sun, Circe, Eumaeus, Ithaca, and Penelope. So I thought, let me try to go one day per episode and see how I go. That went pretty well until I got up to the Circe chapter, which is like this long, epic, dramatic script, and but that one took me about 3 days to get through. But I got caught up, and I didn't think I was going to make it to the end point by June 16th, but yesterday was June 16th, and I got close, and I thought, I am just plowing through the rest of it, and I finished it. I finished it on Bloomsday. That's my little achievement for June. And I just let the book wash over me. I didn't get hung up on any individual passages and have to look things up. This was not the kind of read I wanted to do. I just wanted to like absorb it, sponge it up as best I could, and see how it went. And I have to say, for the most part, it went really, really well. I enjoyed this reading of Ulysses much, much more than the one I did in my early 20s. I think there's a few reasons for that. One is I'm more well read. I've absorbed more. I know more about the things he's alluding to. I know a lot more about European history and culture, Irish history and culture, British history and culture, and I picked up more from it just through osmosis. That being said, there's so much that goes way over my head on this. This book will humble you as a reader. But I did sort of grasp it more. And having read different kinds of books and different kinds of styles and points of view, and just having much more like in the database in here in my brain, what he's doing here stylistically didn't confuse me as much. I started to pick up on the techniques that vary from chapter to chapter. So I would recommend, if you're planning to read Ulysses, to just try to do it that way, like about a chapter or episode every day or two, and just keep going and keep going and keep going. You will get through this book, as tough as it is. Now, what are some other impressions of Ulysses? Well, the verbal pyrotechnics, the literary pyrotechnics of this book are just flat out amazing, stunning. It's tour de force. But that's not really the heart and soul of this novel. The book has a heart and soul. And the heart and soul of this book, I think, comes down to the characters. Leopold Bloom, a Jewish man, sells advertisements for the newspaper in Dublin. His wife, Molly, who's having an affair with Blazes Boylan. And Stephen Dedalus, who's another Irishman, a young guy, student, precocious, brilliant. He was the protagonist of The Portrait of the Artist as a young man, pretty close, parallel probably to James Joyce himself. And Stephen's, satellite friends and family. And that, it's those characters that you begin to care about as the novel goes on. It's a book about marriage, the marriage between Bloom and Molly. It's a book about family. It's a book about fathers and sons, lost fathers, wandering sons. It's about loss. Leopold Bloom, his father committed suicide. His son, Rudy, that he had with Molly, died shortly after birth. And this has impacted their marriage, especially their sex life, as in they don't have intercourse since that happened. And I think it was something like 11 years ago. And as I said before, Molly is having an affair with Blazes Boylan, and it's a book about cuckoldry. So Leopold Bloom is the cuckold of the book, and he knows it's going on. He's sort of allowing it to go on by being away all day on June 16th, 1904. And, there's rich layers of complexity in these characters and their relationships. So that's all really interesting. And it's sort of like under the surface of all this amazing pyrotechnics that Joyce is capable of doing. And so underneath all that, there's something deep that sort of bonds these characters to one another. It's a novel about connection, about loyalty, and faith in humanity at some level. I don't want to get too pie in the sky about it, but there's just aspects of it that are very affirmative. And then you've got Stephen. He's the Telemachus character. If Leopold Bloom is the Ulysses or Odysseus character, and Molly is the Penelope character, Stephen is Telemachus, who in the Odyssey is the son of Odysseus. Stephen's mother has passed away, and on her deathbed, she wanted Stephen to pray and accept God. And Stephen's not into that, and he refused, and he seems to be racked by guilt and tormented by that, and is tormented by the loss of his mother. And he's come back to Ireland, and he seems to be drifting, and maybe going through an identity crisis, and he's kind of struggling, as many young people do. And his father figures in the story as well. He comes in and out of the plot. The plot of the book is pretty simple, and I'll just do a thumbnail of it. There's a lot more going on in this, but basically it's one day in the life of Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus and Molly. And the book starts with Stephen, and he's living in this rented tower on the shoreline called a Martello Tower, where he's living with an Englishman, Buck Mulligan. And we see him go off to his teaching job, and then he sort of wanders in and out of Dublin like for the rest of the day and night. He comes in and out of the book. In the Bloom plotline, which starts a few episodes into the book, we see him rise in the morning and get ready for the day, and he's sort of preparing breakfast for his wife. And his friend Patty Dignam has just died suddenly, and Bloom's going to attend the funeral in the morning, and we see a chapter devoted to that. That's the Hades chapter. And, so he goes to that funeral, he stops at work, he's ogling women, on the tram and here and there. And he keeps kind of running into Blazes Boylan and trying to avoid him because he knows what Blazes Boylan is up to. He's on to way to 7 Eccles Street, the Bloom household, to have sex with his wife. Later in the book, there's a sort of fascinating chapter called the Nausicaa episode, where we see a young woman, Gertie, who's beautiful, and she's kind of like coming into flower as a young woman, and exhibiting herself on the beach, and Leopold Bloom is off to the side jerking off while she's sort of exhibiting herself. Fascinating chapter with multiple points of view. And then later we get into, there's lots of stuff I'm leaving out here, lots of visit to pubs and so forth. But eventually in the evening, the book arrives at the red light district in Dublin, where Bloom has these like phantasmagoric hallucinations. This is the one that's written as like a play script, and stranger than any Fellini film or any kind of cinema you've ever seen. It's like a theater of the absurd, really sort of out there, but utterly fascinating chapter. And at this point, Leopold and Stephen encounter one another again, and Stephen's kind of getting into some scrapes, and Leopold takes him under his wing and eventually gets him back and takes him back to his home, Bloom's home, and gives him some cocoa and some food, and they talk for a while, and then they go out in the backyard and urinate together, and then Stephen sort of goes off on his way at that point. And the novel then ends with Bloom coming upstairs to the bedroom to be at his wife's side, and Molly Bloom is given the last word. The final chapter is the Penelope episode, where she has this long stream of consciousness internal monologue where she talks about her many admirers and lovers, and her courtship with Bloom, and the affair she's having with Blazes Boylan, and what she thinks about all that. And also some of her doubts about where he's been all day and what he's been up to, and is he cheating on her, and so on and so forth. So, but it ends in a very uplifting way with her memories of their courtship, and when he asked her to marry him, and she said yes, and all that. So that's a quick rundown of the plot, and again, I'm leaving a billion things out, but you get the idea. Now, what makes this a hard read? Well, James Joyce is smarter than all of us put together, and he's not afraid to showboat and showcase his genius, and it's very hard for us readers to keep pace with him. He's on this like whole other level of things, so that's certainly what puts off a lot of readers, is they just are like utterly confused about what's going on. That's modernism, folks. That's how it works. And every episode, every chapter is written in a different style and in a different register, and sometimes that shifts within the chapter, so you can really lose your bearings if you're not paying close enough attention, and that confounds our expectations. This is not reading like a Dickens novel, or it's not a Jane Austen novel. It doesn't have like this, it's not a Hemingway novel. Like, this is sort of rough going that way. He's always like switching hats on us. Now, here's why the book is not as hard as you might think. If you come at it with the right attitude, here's my recommendation. You have to just sponge up what you can and not worry about, quote, getting it or getting everything. Just soak it up. Let it wash over you. Absorb it, and you'll be surprised at how much you can retain. I like the fact that every episode is different. It keeps things fresh. Those changes of perspectives are what kept me going. Like, I never felt like overly fatigued. If the whole novel was written in the unpunctuated stream of consciousness of Molly Bloom's point of view, I might not make it through to the end, right? But no, everything's different from episode to episode, and I think that's a good thing. It actually helped keep me going. And once you understand that there is a real storyline here, it's not much of a plot, but it's a real story with real characters, then you realize that he's just kind of coming at this story from different slants and in different styles, and you'll recognize like the moments in these episodes when something sort of real that you can empathize with like emerges, and you sort of, it touches you, right? You have to pay attention, you have to be patient, you have to not get frustrated as he's sort of spinning and spinning, and he's got all the plates twirling and all that stuff, like the Ed Sullivan show, like acrobatic act. No, like, don't worry about that stuff. Just get into the characters. Also recognize that the book is sort of playing off of the Odyssey, although that's pretty submerged. None of the chapters are really named after these scenes from the Odyssey. We know that that's what Joyce had in mind, but you don't have to know that as you're reading a book. But it helps to recognize when you're saying, oh, okay, like this is sort of, what about this chapter has anything to do with the Cyclops, for instance, or the oxen of the sun, or whatever. So it helps to know the Odyssey by Homer, but you don't really need to know that to get something out of the book. Okay. So, but just understand there's real characters here and a real storyline, and then that'll be like your center of gravity. Let's talk a little bit about setting too, because that is one fascinating aspect of Ulysses. This book attempts to embody literally the world of Dublin in the early 20th century. It's gritty, it's sweaty, it's smarmy, it's ugly, it's spermy, it's beautiful, it's sexy, it's gratuitous, it's profane, it's sacred, and everything in between. It's all there. Like Walt Whitman, this book is vast and contains multitudes. I really felt like when I was reading this was like, this just seems to contain the whole world in it. The world in microcosm in Dublin, but at some point it's like the world and beyond, into the universe, into astronomical proportions. But Dublin is certainly the microcosm here, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Like, you can sort of taste and smell Dublin when you're reading this book. It's a very materialist novel. It's filled with things. It's filled with stuff. It's filled with sensations. And just dive into that and live and breathe, even though it sometimes stinks, live and breathe the world of Dublin that he's portraying here. No one has ever done anything quite like this. I feel like Joyce has stretched the boundaries of realism to the extreme. So this is a modernist novel, obviously, but in a lot of ways it's like, I imagine he's saying to himself, okay, you want realism, I'm going to give you ultra realism, super realism, so much detail, so much to grab onto that it's overwhelming, but you will get the feel of this place and what the environment that these characters are breathing in. And ultimately, I think it's helpful to recognize that this book is a comedy. Like it it doesn't really have a tragic ending, although sad things happen, bad things happen, and these characters are in bad straits. There's infidelity going on. Uh, there's anti-Semitism. There's the whole stuff with Irish rebellion and the problems with the British rule, and on and on and on, and like tons of like religious angst and just intellectual, torpor. But it's there's some I felt like sort of uplifted on the whole in reading this book, and there are several moments in the book where I felt that. I feel like Joyce here is giving the thumbs up to life, and the major driving forces of that attitude are Leopold Bloom and his wife Molly, but especially Leopold. But it's no wonder that the last words of the book are yes, 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 uplifting. So that will keep you going too. This book is humane for all of its sort of ugliness and its warts and its rough edges and its different angles and slants. It's about humanity. It's humane. It's a work of the human spirit. It's a book about humanity. I love it for that. I used to think that James Joyce's use of the Odyssey as a framework for this book was intended to satirize the modern world, to sort of look at the urban world of Dublin and show how grubby it is and how anti-heroic its citizens are. And I now realize the second time through that maybe I was naive about that. The allusions to Homer, I think, are meant as touchstones, sounding boards. It's a thematic organizing principle that helps to give another layer of structure to the novel. Like I said before, you don't even have to know much about Homer to have a basic appreciation of what he's doing here, but you get added value when you see how he's using the Odyssey. But I feel like Joyce was influenced by certain historical theories. In particular, I think of Vico, who I know he had an interest in, and he used Vico's theories of history for Finnegan's Wake. But Vico believed that civilization went through these cycles of growth and decay and went through different stages. And also in the air at this time, I'm not sure Joyce was familiar with the work of Oswald Spengler, who wrote the book The Decline of the West, which was popular in the 20s. I just don't know if that was published yet before Joyce wrote Ulysses. If it was, I'm sure Joyce knew it. But he was also interested in these historical patterns. And then there's, of course, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, which I'm sure Joyce knew. But I feel like Joyce wants us to see these patterns in modern life that echo and refract the patterns that you can see in the epic poem, the Odyssey. So that's what I mean by like touchstones and patterns and sounding boards. So sometimes when these sort of the traditional kind of impacts or touches the contemporary, it will expose how far short of heroism and epic grandeur the modern day life has become. I think that's certainly here. But there's more to it. There are some of those connections are real parallels. And I think that, for instance, with Leopold Bloom, the protagonist of the novel, for all his flaws and weaknesses, I think he is heroic, like Odysseus. He's not, in so many ways, he's not like Odysseus at all. But in some ways he is. In some ways he's wily. He sees, he understands. He's curious, like Odysseus. and he's he's willing and wanting to wander and absorb the world. And yeah, there are parallels there that are not satirical, or other than satirical. And so is Molly. Like, she's a very strange Penelope figure, pretty ironic in a lot of ways. But, you know, she has a heroic side too. And these characters, you know, it takes heroic endurance just to make it through a June day. Like, I think that's one thing I love about this book as I reflect on it. It's like, just to make it through today, into the evening to the next day, I can feel like an epic struggle a lot of days. And Joyce sort of magnifies that and gives it like this sort of panoramic view in his modernistic, wild, ecstatic way that he has of doing it. But the heroism and the surviving is real, and that's what I mean about the book having a deep humanity to it. Like, despite its contrivances, and so I think Ulysses is a celebration of life. Ultimately, that's my take on it. Have you read Ulysses? What do you think of this Gabler edition? I'm curious, those of you who have read multiple editions, which is your favorite? Any reactions you have, if you're reading it, if you gave up on it, if you love it, if you have insights to share about what the book's really about, let us know in the comments. Let's get the conversation going. Thanks for spending some time with me. I hope if you haven't tackled Ulysses that you do someday. You gotta be strong. You gotta be heroic to read a book like this. But for many of us, I think it's a really rewarding read. And with that, I'll close it out. Hope you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.